I want to start by dedicating whatever I have to say to somebody who unfortunately is not here today. Uh, those of you who have had as long an association with celiac disease as I have probably know the name Gary Gray, Dr. Gary Gray. Dr. Gary Gray was, without exaggeration, the father of celiac disease, certainly at Stanford. Uh, he was a giant in the field of gastroenterology. He was, without exaggeration, he launched Stanford's celiac research efforts as well as patient care efforts. He built our first Stanford Celiac Clinic and nurtured it to be what was and still is today, without a doubt, the best Stanford comprehensive celiac clinic on this side of the Rockies. I'm not going to get into any argument with my friends at the University of Chicago, but I think we can safely agree that you're not going to find a better comprehensive celiac center on this side of the Rockies than where you currently are sitting. Gary also mentored and trained many important people in the celiac field, including Dr. Nielsen Fernandez Becker, who took over his celiac center and clinic from him and has done such a remarkable job of building it to worldwide prominence. He trained our very first pediatric celiac clinician, Eric Sibley, who also happened to have diagnosed my own son many years ago with celiac disease. Gary unfortunately passed last fall, shortly around Thanksgiving, and there was not an event that I recall of this sort in the past 25 years at Stanford where we did not see Gary out here engaging with patients, and I know he will be missed. So I'd like to dedicate this one to Gary. As Hillary mentioned, I was asked to tell you about celiac research, and I think one way for us to think about the field of celiac research is to analogize it to what we all, including the young ones in this room, have experienced in the past 3 years in the context of COVID-19. We went from a time that I think everybody in this room remembers to when COVID-19 was some weird curiosity that nobody knew what to make out of, to an existential threat, to something that gave both hope and fear, to today, where we all, most of us, seem to think it's a perfectly manageable condition. And we did all of that in what, 3 years? Well, as Hillary's chicken video this morning told you, we're now 83 years into the celiac cycle and counting. I'd like to say today that we are in the field of celiac disease where we were in the COVID-19 pandemic around the fall of 2020, where there was still a lot of fear with this condition, but there were reasons for hope. And the reasons for hope were coming from where? They were coming from science. I think that's where we are. That's where I see us today in this field. And of course, if you remember what life was like back in 2020, late 2020, you might also remember that there was a lot of anticipation back then because there were some moments of truth that were coming up on whether our vaccines would work, on whether our medicines would work, on whether things would be back to square one as they were earlier in the year. And that's more or less where we are today in the celiac disease field. And so unfortunately, this is a disease where that same cycle has taken a century instead of 3 years. But there are very close parallels over there, and I'd like you to think about that. So as Hillary mentioned, close, and in fact probably the primary driver for me as a scientist is the hope that before long there could be some non-dietary therapeutic options for our celiac patients. It's a hope that I've held for about 23 years now, and I probably will continue to hold it until it actually becomes a reality. Where are we in the field today of creating non-dietary therapeutic options? About 20 years ago, we proposed that there might be at least two different ways in which one could develop a medicine for celiac patients. One would be by detoxifying toxic gluten within the stomach of a patient. This was something that Gary Gray himself championed very vocally in the early days of our research program and collaborative research programs. That line of research by now has spawned at least two experimental medicines. One that hopefully will start phase 3 clinical trials within several months to a year. Another one that's just starting phase 2 clinical trials. So there's still a ways to go, a distance to go in each of those, but there is hope. Another line of thinking that we had proposed about 20 years ago was there's a key enzyme, Dr. Fernandez-Becker referred to it, called transglutaminase, that plays a very critical role in unmasking the toxic characteristics of gluten in celiac patients. And the good news is that you can block this enzyme in most animals and have those animals be quite normal. So it doesn't seem to be essential, at least for adult life. And so we had proposed about 20 years ago that if you could make a medicine with the right characteristics that could block this enzyme, you might be able to treat this disease in using some kind of an oral pill. Today, there are at least two clinical candidates, one of which that has actually shown evidence that that hypothesis does have merit in celiac disease and is currently actively undergoing phase 2 clinical trials. Then there are a whole bunch of other what I call skunkworks approaches toward celiac therapy. They range from blocking another protein that Dr. Fernandez-Becker introduced you to, HLA-DQ2, to even more avant-garde approaches where you might be able to retrain the damage-causing T cells in a celiac patient's intestine into benign T cells. I would consider those kinds of approaches very much in the realm of science and still need to be tested in the only place that counts, which is the human patient. What are the challenges that we encounter when we think about non-dietary therapies? I was thinking about this morning, and I would say, broadly speaking, I'd lump them into two categories, both of which have precedence in other fields of medicine. One category of challenges goes from after one knows, after the science has been preliminarily validated in human patients, how do you make a clinically viable, FDA-approved medicine out of that? That involves a whole bunch of inside baseball that is probably not worth going into over here, but that remains a major challenge for the celiac field today. How do you develop a roadmap to making a medicine that a doctor can prescribe after you know that the science works? The other challenge, unfortunately, is a commercial challenge. Many people who believe that it is eminently possible to make a celiac medicine aren't persuaded that there's money to be made. And for better or worse, we live in a capitalist society, and if somebody isn't persuaded that there's money to be made, they're not going to make an investment. So that's another type of a challenge that the field faces. Where's the future going? I think, as I mentioned, I have a reasonably short life ahead of me, the goal of making celiac medicines, or at least the first prototypes of celiac medicines, will keep me busy for the remainder of my career. Whether in past patient support groups, I used to refer to this vision as it's round the corner. Today, I'm not sure if it's round the corner or I'm tilting at windmills. You decide. I will also put in a major plug for basic research. Dr. Fernandez-Becker referred to it. I think the thing that every celiac needs to draw inspiration from is that celiac disease is absolutely at the forefront of our understanding of human autoimmune conditions. We don't know as much about any other human autoimmune disease as we know about celiac disease. What we learned in celiac disease 15 and 20 years ago is today informing people who are trying to understand multiple sclerosis with the hope of treating patients who have multiple sclerosis. So all of you who have celiac disease and stay engaged with your doctor and stay engaged with celiac research are not just helping yourselves, you are also helping other people who have other autoimmune conditions. So I will put in a plug for that level of basic research. My final vision that I'd like to share with you, it's something that over the COVID pandemic years I've become increasingly preoccupied with, is the hope, the possibility, not just the hope. I've held the hope for many years, but I think we're finally at a point in celiac science that we can contemplate that there may come a day when we might be able to prevent this disease. And while it's only academics like me who have the luxury to look out 20 and 50 years into the horizon, I think we all know that whether we like it or not, this disease is in our genes. And somebody's got to prime that pump. And hopefully it's the academics who care about this condition who will do that. But I do think that there is a future in this field where we might not just think about treating and curing this disease, but also perhaps someday preventing. So thanks again for all that you do for engaging with the celiac support groups and your doctors, and I welcome any questions that you might have.